Hi, this is Harriet Grayson, your host and the producer of Community Culture Showcase. And I always try to get some interesting programs, things that you might not suspect are going on in your own neighborhood. And so I am really fortunate to have a man who actually makes his great hobby for the public's benefit in trying to not only reenact, but also to tell the whole country about what it was like to be involved in the American Revolution. I mean, I think we forget it. And here in New England, where so much of it started, and where in Connecticut and Rhode Island and Massachusetts, so much activity was going on, that it is with supreme delight that I have with me Sal, who is going, not only is he here in presence, he is here in uniform to try to explain to everybody what it was like to actually be a part of the American Revolution. So tell us a little bit about your organization and a little bit about what you do. And then I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to stand because you're wearing the full regalia. Look at that hat. I mean, unbelievable. Actually made from horsehair. And he actually also has one of those, what do you call it? It's not a sword.
Saber.
A saber. And he's going to actually show us the saber. So, Sal, I give you the floor. You are dressed to the hilt. Tell us about your organization, about what you guys do, and if you need volunteers and more people to come and join you.
Well, thank you. The Second Continental Dragoons was originally formed at the request of General Washington to Congress on December 12th, 1776. The regiment was composed of 80% of it from men of Connecticut who fought on horse and on foot as cavalry. And we were commissioned as the first commissioned cavalry for the brand new United States. And in fact, we crossed the rivers with Washington to the battles of Trenton, the battles of Princeton. We marched through that winter. Coming home, we have the actual books. In the bicentennial era, I was contacted by officers from the research department at West Point Library and asked if I would help work a research project on bringing this unit to life for the bicentennial. Local communities had reenactors who were doing various forms of the different units from Connecticut and other places. Some people knew me and knew that I rode a horse, and one thing led to another. And I tried it out at first on my students where I was teaching in Stanford, and it just expanded from there day by day, learning a little more, mentoring with John Hayes, who wrote the book for the state of Connecticut, Connecticut's Revolutionary Cavalry, Story of Sheldon's Horse. I met with the family, and from there it's been a journey of reading original letters, diaries, messages from Washington, his letters, and getting a flavor and a feel for what they are. The result is that through the auspices of the state of Connecticut and the 106th Congress of the United States, we were recognized as the replacements of the original men. The regiment was reestablished in 1978 through the Secretary of State in Connecticut.
Wow.
We are not reenactors, we are the actual 2nd Dragoons, the modern version. Our mission today is not carrying messages for Washington or running the spy boats out of New London or out of Darien or Greenwich or Stanford. Our job today is to educate the public about Connecticut's role in the American Revolution, to support our modern army, and to really show the public the other side of the story. It wasn't all the battles. The battles are like the exclamation point of the suffering and the sacrifices that people did. These were normal people like any of us that suddenly their town was involved in a war, and they really weren't prepared for any of this. And the trials that people went through, the change in consciousness, because they were split over being loyal to a king who was their government, and for us to change that. And why would we change it? Connecticut was very unique because it had already had somewhat what we would call democratic government compared to the rest of the colonies under Governor Trumbull. And in fact, on December 23rd, 1774, I have one of the original letters where he informs the selectmen of the various towns to prepare for the oncoming Civil War.
Oh,
And I found that very interesting, a civil war.
yes.
And that's what they referred to this as, a civil uprising over their rights as Englishmen. Colonists were considered second-class citizens. Connecticut had a business climate, a process for electing officials, taxation, pretty much the way we are today. We haven't changed too much in 200 some years. So at that time, telling one of those hard-nosed Yankees from Connecticut, you're second rate and you do everything that the king wishes, wasn't sitting well.
Right.
And in fact, in Connecticut, people say a third, and a third wanted either the king or independence or nothing to do with the war. The truth is most people in Connecticut, as in Rhode Island and it is Massachusetts, wanted nothing to do with hostilities. They wanted to be able to conduct their business, conduct their trade. They wanted to live their lives and farm. That was it. They wanted to pay what they considered a fair tax, but they wanted their voice heard in England at the Parliament. It didn't happen.
Right.
And one thing led to another, as we
Right.
know.
Yes, yes.
And the Sons of Liberty started up. They were all over the country, committees of correspondence up and down the coast, secret writers such as Bissell from Connecticut, who wrote and gave the warnings and sent messages. It became quite active. As this went on, people turned to Connecticut to see what was really going on. Connecticut was the best organized colony for military, and it became as a surprise to me when I started reading this, but
Right.
our state library has some of the most fantastic original documents to read. You can spend, and I did, days and days and days just sitting in there. Sometimes you forget to go to lunch or take a break. It's fascinating to read an original letter and say, this is it. This is what
Right.
they did that I teach. And Connecticut was organized. So it had its own artillery trains called train bands. It had all of its own militia infantry units and rules and regulations. And it had light horse units. And it had 28 such regiments. And they formed 5 full light horse cavalry regiments, one of which was the 5th Light Horse, which became the 2nd Dragoons. And then when they became so big after Washington had crossed the Delaware and had settled in for the winter of 76, 77, the 5th Light Horse went home, and the 2nd Dragoons, the small numbers that they were at that point, finished up with Washington, went to Millstone Town in New Jersey, from there to Flemingstown, which was Colonel Fleming's Tavern, went up through the Jerseys back to Connecticut in the dead of winter in January, weather like we have now.
Wow.
And ended up eventually at a place called Wethersfield.
Wethersfield, Connecticut, yes.
And on what is today the Old Town Green, formed up a menage and started training the 1st Commissioned Cavalry and bringing in its recruits. It became the largest single volunteer cavalry regiment until the American Civil War. 420 men were in it. They had women in it.
Wow.
The women got equal rations to the men, but we found out through research and experimentation that the women, unfortunately for the men's sake, were considered more valuable because they knew how to handle the horses and take care of the camps and everything else, to the point that you couldn't risk them in battle. So you would send the men to battle. Let the men get shot, not the ladies.
That's good.
And they got an equal ration, which was astounding because this particular cavalry unit was Washington's favorite in the North. They got a third more pay and equipment and goods than did the regular Continental infantry. These women were equated with these men. So Connecticut already had equal rights for their women who were serving in the war.
In the military, yes.
And
yes.
finding this in a book and seeing it under the general orders, you look at this and you go, oh my God, what happens if people find this out? Well, our ladies find it out. So today they're not called camp followers, they're called staff, because they do far more than hang around the camp.
So how did you as a person get interested in something like this with the American Revolution? I mean, you were a history teacher, but still, I mean, what brought you to this point where this became really all-consuming almost? I mean, I think that it's just something that takes up hours and hours of your time. What got you kind of interested in this part of history?
I think a good mystery. The fact that they were part of Washington's Secret Service, there was more than one spy ring. The Culper spy ring was the one in Connecticut. There was another one in New York State. There was one in Virginia. Each state had its own operative system, and they all reported to Washington. The most successful one was the one from Connecticut, those damn Yankees.
Yes, yes, yes.
And in
that's true.
fact, it was the Pennsylvanians that called us damn Yankees at the Battle of White Plains. So we learn more as we go through the history. But it got to me because I was working with my own students, and they liked the mystery. And it's suddenly like, what if this, or what if that? Or, oh, do you think they really did this? And we had one of the forts mentioned where they stayed, which was called Fort Stanford. And that was at the gateway to New England at the time, as Washington referred it. And Greenwich was considered the frontier. So the kids are going, oh my God, oh my God. And I was very fortunate to work with a talented artist named Don Troiani. Don led me to the New England Genealogical Society, which had an original orderly book of the 2nd Dragoons. Now that orderly book essentially is a day-to-day diary of what they did, how they did it. So suddenly I had this diary that I was reading, and I started recognizing streets and towns and people's names. And it was the unfolding mystery. You just keep going with it. And the more I got into it, the more I read, and the more I realized, my God, Connecticut was really that important.
That's fascinating. What is for the people who know nothing about cavalry or know nothing about, really, a lot of people don't really know much about the American Revolution, to be honest, is what is, you say dragoon?
It comes from the French word dragon, which means dragon.
Okay.
And it started in the late 16th century where they were experimenting with what they called portable hand cannons, or the first forms of musketry, which were for the average person what today we would call a blunderbuss-like instrument. And to see a man trying this out on horse with the belching flame and the smoke reminded the local peasants of a dragon, and hence the name Dragoon. And they became special. Under Friedrich the great Prussian general, during the early 1700s, he developed this idea of using these oversized horses today, similar to what we would call draft or Percherons. Clydesdale is another breed, similar but not the same. But these types of horses would be lined up in these long lines on the open fields of Europe.
Wow.
And they would literally move forward like a mowing machine and just cutting everything down. But it cost a lot to feed the animals and to get the men that willing were to risk fighting like that. For the wood side fighting, in between, which is what we have here in New England, they needed the lightweight horses. They needed riders that were lighting equipment. So the word light came in first of all. Everything had to be made so that the man was more comfortable able to hop on and off a horse. The horse breed was the barb, as they referred to it in those days, because it came from the Barbary coast of Africa. They are what we call today the Arab.
Arab.
And Washington specifically ordered our particular regiment to have barbs that were 14 to 15 hands tall, geldings, dark bay in color.
Wow, so specific.
The reason is that they had to match his horse. He was the commanding general. He had a barb. And in fact, there's a tale. I know there's about 80% truth to it, not 100%, but 80%, of he and Light Horse Harry Lee, the famous General Lee's father, who fought as a cavalryman out of Virginia, where they swapped horses, and Magnolio was that horse. In the historic painting of the Battle of Monmouth, Washington is on the bay. His other horse, he had 3 different white horses throughout his career. Blue skin, one was Horatio. I do not know the name of the third one. But these 3 horses were the white ones that were used for diplomatic service. Washington knew the politics of the time. So he knew that a white horse gave you a different look. Napoleon did the same thing. And in fact, his horse is preserved in Paris at the museum there. But the white horse was the sign of the diplomat. Washington would ride in a coach, get off and out of the coach about 1.5 miles out of town, and the white horse would be on. If he was going to battle, he would get out of the coach and get on the bay. The darker horse is not as easy to spot in the battlefield.
Okay, just like a camouflage of a kind.
Was more of that for that time. And Magnolia was a very fast horse. The rumor is that he sold it to Light Horse Harry Lee for 5,000 acres of Virginia farmland. Then they raced, and Harry beat him with the horse, which George, being a lover of horses, would not have had any fun with that day. But we were ordered, and we have the actual letter, that this is what you'll do.
I'm going to ask you if you could stand up, because I would like people to see your entire uniform. And this is actually as true as possibly can be to the actual uniform worn by the Light Cavalry in 1774.
In 1777, this uniform came into existence. Before that, we had the Connecticut coats, which were chocolate brown with a white facing. Connecticut had all of its troops organized and uniformed. People think that they were ragtag, and they weren't. Connecticut was pretty well off. In fact, it probably is what caused the near bankruptcy of Connecticut in 1778, because at that point we were fighting a war, and now here's the uniforms.
Right.
But this is a French uniform. Connecticut's 2nd Dragoons are the only cavalry unit that was equipped, trained, and paid for by the government of France.
Wow, okay.
So this uniform is a French uniform with this special collar from Washington's aide, which you'll see a lot of the generals. It's called a Tillman collar. It's a cut different from an English square collar.
Okay.
And they wanted something different, and it was done by France. In fact, we have the letters from the King of France to his clothier general for the insurgents in North America. And I always found that interesting, because they would say insurgents. The English referred to us as terrorists. And then here, the British Army referred to us as rebels. Sounds familiar.
Right.
But the coat is the latest fashion from France.
Okay.
Form-fitting.
All right.
This is made from what we call wool mitten, as we found in the orders then. There is one mill in Canada that makes it, and that's where we get our wool.
All right.
The buttons are a reproduction of an original that was found at West Point, and we had a mold made of it, and we have a fellow who casts the buttons. The linen waistcoat was standard. We have these from the records of the state of Connecticut, Assembly records, and the General Council records for the state.
Okay.
The breeches are white leather. This
Oh.
is my dress pair, because today we're on TV.
Yes.
The pair on the horse would not look as clean and as neat when you're
Okay.
riding a horse. They have a piece here. I'm going to step out
Yeah,
so you
step
can
out
see
so we
this.
can see the boots.
The boots and this piece above it, this is called a guard.
Okay.
And this protected the knee of the leather breeches from rubbing against the leather guard here of the boot top.
Okay.
So that you wouldn't get a hole or a welt on your kneecap. These were what they called the half boot.
All right.
And it's by the French, and for a short period of time from 1760 until 1790, the French used this type of boot because it was cheaper to make. You could make it out of 2 pieces of leather. As times got better and beef production went up, they switched back to a solid 1-piece boot, which became very popular among the United States cavalry during the Civil War. But in this period, this is what we wore. What I have at the bottom are original spurs from the Revolution.
Wow.
And they're put on with a spur strap that we used all the way up until 1940 with the United States Cavalry. The design is perfect. It keeps the spur from hurting the horse, so that all you have to do is just enough to nudge him.
Okay.
And just like a mother would nudge a child or grab him
Right.
by the ear.
Right.
About the same amount of problem. The rest of the uniform is the standard for the period. I'm wearing an officer's sash, an epaulette on my right side indicating a captain. If it was on my left shoulder, I would be called a lieutenant.
No.
And from which we get the word lieutenant.
Lieutenant, yes.
I'm wearing the gorget, which is the sign of a commanding officer, and this was the riskiest part of all, because when you wore one of these with your ruffles coming out,
Yes.
designating an officer again, this is where the sharpshooters on either army, all armies had sharpshooters,
Yes.
special riflemen that would wear these, and they would aim for this spot. because if they hit the bullet just a high of that, they would kill the opponent's officer.
Right.
And in fact, at the Battle of Saratoga, one of Morgan's riflemen on our side shot a British officer at 400 yards, which was unheard of, because a musket was good for 75 yards. So this was just a horrendous weapon.
Right.
And what I'm wearing here is what they call my throg. And this is a heart-shaped frog, so that the sword sits straight down. This is an original buckle from the period of the Revolution. It's hallmarked in silver, so we know it was an officer's one.
Yes.
And the sword I have on is a Dutch import. And this sword is one of the earlier ones that was used in the Revolution. And it was the prototype for some of the American swords. It looks very much like the later period ones that Tiffany and others would develop, and Collins out of Connecticut would develop for cavalry sabers. But it's very delicate. The blade is really a nice piece, balanced. We were surprised that they would make this.
It's actually very light. I was actually holding it before.
And that is, again, is when you're on the horse, you have to be able to swing anywhere in all degrees and angles quickly. Unlike the movies, you don't do this. This is called a point of war. This is so the horse can see it, that you're moving forward. As you're bringing it up to fight an enemy, you want to hit with the flat of the blade, not the edge, because the steel wasn't good. And if you hit edge to edge, you could crack the blade in half. I have one from the Battle of Saratoga where you can see that. And the expression back then, which we still use in training men with the blade, is what's a cavalryman without his saber, or a dragoon without his sword? And the answer is dead, sir. It's the only answer on the exam, because without the sword, you have nothing.
Right.
The pistol is only good at 10 feet, 15 feet. The movies, we laugh every time we see a movie where a guy is shooting. It doesn't happen. If they had to fire a real 60 caliber horse pistol while riding a horse, trying to control the animal with just their legs, one hand, and people are screaming all around them, it doesn't happen that way.
It doesn't happen.
This, though, works every time.
Okay.
And the idea was to come across a man's chest so that you would break his ribs. But if you could, as you were coming in to do this, and it was always the right side, you didn't want to cross over your left because that put you off balance on the horse. The little things we learned.
Yes.
In fact, I'm going to show you something at the end of this that people think is a World War II expression, but it actually goes back to the Revolution. So the sword was like this, and the idea was to come in at the last moment and swing the blade in like this to take the man's head off. If you couldn't, you used the flat to hit the body. And the idea was to knock him off the horse.
Sure.
So at the end of that, as you're riding at 30 miles an hour trying to keep on the horse, you do a thumbs up. Thumbs up, that you bring your sword in and back into the place. And as you can see, I'm doing that. My hand switches. So his hand go like this because I'm switching to the reins.
Oh,
right
okay.
off the bat. So you learn to switch hand to hand to the reins. This is not a John Wayne movie.
Right.
This is how you actually have to do to keep control of the horse, stay on the horse while people are screaming and guns are going off all around you, and return your sword so that then you can use both hands and ride as fast as you can away from everything. When you fought in the cavalry then, it's, again, not like the movies. When they did a cavalry charge, it was essentially a controlled stampede. You're at 100 yards at the most away from an enemy. One army didn't do that later on. It was called the Charge of the Light Brigade, and they lost almost the entire British Light Brigade because a horse can only run at that speed for so long, and then he's tired. And when he's tired, he slows down, and the other side catches up to you awfully quick. Plus, when you go past each other, now you're facing their army, they're facing yours. Both sides don't like that, so they both try to get back across the field. So there's generally a second crossing. And again, the swords are out. The total time for a cavalry charge is about 8 to 10 seconds. We did one on the actual grounds in Schoharie, New York. They have it on film. And in 6 seconds, we crossed almost 500 yards without a problem. Fantastic day for us.
Yes.
And then we thought about, what if there was an enemy? And then we truly got scared because that meant in 7 seconds, our life was over.
Right.
Only 1 out of 2 come out of that unscathed. So the sword was the ultimate weapon. And then, of course, this is from France. This is a French Dragoon helmet. They were originally made in the 1750s under Marshal de Saxe, who was a man who wrote the books for the king at Chambord Castle, which was where another young man later on went for some schooling in France, and he became very well known worldwide. All the French officers learned about equitation and cavalry. It was the same here at a little place called West Point. Equitation was an important skill that you had to have to command on the field. That man's name was Napoleon. He wasn't considered very good, but he learned to get better.
Right.
This is a brass helmet with a leather bottom so that a man can wear it, and then it's fitted to the man's head. The chin scales on the side are to protect the face from the sword.
Oh, okay.
So this whole thing, and this one does have a dent. When we do the demonstrations for the public, it's very real. We are training, but if you miss,
Yes.
you've got to have a helmet on. But this was worn by the 2nd, and almost 80% of the 2nd Dragoons ended up with one of these by the end of the war.
And it has the French colors on it, I see.
This is the American color given to us, actually.
Oh, okay.
This is the Connecticut colors, the blue turban and the gold knots from which the United States Cavalry and the state police of Connecticut get theirs. It's the blue and gold of Connecticut's flag to show Washington and the Congress that we were still the property of the colony, the newly formed state of Connecticut.
I see. And I see that that's actual horsehair.
This is actual horsehair, and that long piece would hang down my back. Horsehair is very hard to cut with a saber. So it was the proverbial second chance from this helmet. This is a crash zone. So we've seen some of these in Europe at the museums from the later period where they would be dented and this would fold in. That gave a man a proverbial second chance because the sword hit that and didn't harm his head.
His head, right.
And the same with a horsehair. They would hit this and it would blunt the blow so that he wasn't cut in half. The feather is the feather of Valor. Bottom part represents purity. The red tip represents blood shed in battle. And this was awarded to the 2nd Dragoons, and the orders from the colonel of the regiment to the men to wear this plume and no other under pain of punishment, which meant a flogging.
Okay.
So that they knew that they weren't to adorn their helmets with turkey feathers or eagle feathers or hawk feathers or anything else.
Right.
This was the uniform that was awarded. This is the uniform ordered by Washington and the Congress because of their service, and they should be proud of it. And that's what they did.
Wow.
So everything on, I'm wearing everything that they would have had. Not the dress breeches today. I would have been riding a pair of riding breeches. Surprisingly enough, it is warm. You can wear this uniform to about 0 degrees, maybe 15 below zero.
Wow.
They had me test this with a cloak, the same as Washington wore. We were very fortunate during the bicentennial to get to work on some of the committees. One was restoring his clothing down in Virginia, and they were working with Williamsburg Restorations. I was able to given a copy of the cloak. We then made it up, and when we made it up to what it was, you couldn't see me. He was a big man.
Oh.
He was almost 6'6", and when that cloak came on, it stood up over my head, and you couldn't see my feet or anything else, and that was because his cloak, being a big man, had to fit on him over the horse saddle.
Yes, yes.
So it was huge.
Yes.
We made an adaptation for all of our men. We cut it at every man at the knee so we can walk. But it does keep you warm. You can fight in battle to 15 below zero.
Wow, amazing. And the horses are not disturbed by
You
that
won't
kind?
take the horse. The man can fight. The horses at 32 degrees, you try to put them away and protect them. And in fact, that would be the hardest part in any of the cavalry units at a time. Lack of horses, but the horses needed to be stabled and fed. In fact, our regiment had to leave Colchester in December of 1780 because the French had come, and the 4th Continental Dragoons were sent there because it was a good area for grain and hay and stabling. Well, there wasn't enough room, and we had to march from there back up to Hartford, and from Hartford up the river to Northampton, where they could finally put us up.
Oh, my.
So our men, in weather like we have right now, had to march every day on horseback. And on a good day, you could do 20 to 22 miles. So I thought about Northampton being almost 26 miles above the border, and another 26 miles from Hartford to the borderline, and you suddenly realize
50 miles, yeah.
and then from Hartford to Colchester was a day's march. So you're looking at 3 to 4 days in weather like this where they're marching. The problem is if they didn't find places where they could put these men up at night at the local farms, that meant that they got off the horse and would walk in the dark, one behind the other, to keep going until they could find a spot where they could lay in out of the wind. So they would have gone without food, without water from the man. The horse would get the water. The first rule is you take care of the horse.
Right.
So the men would have gone hungry for 3 or 4 days. The horses would have gotten water, whatever grain or hay they could find along the way at farmers, and that's the only rest they would have had till they got to where they were supposed to be. And in weather like this, that can hurt.
Yes, yes.
I've done winter patrol on horse and the governor's horse guards, and I can tell you there and in doing some where we practice each winter, your feet go numb. You actually cannot feel your feet in the stirrups.
Right.
It's a little different.
Well, I think what happens is by you doing this personally, you're able to actually tell people, especially young people perhaps, that actually how it felt to be, have been a part of this kind of thing. And it's like you are, by doing all this, kind of embodiment of history. And so that you can relate that to the, it's not like you read in a book that Washington was cold. You experienced being cold. You saw what it's like to be on a horse and do what these men were doing. And, it's amazing that that we did as well as we did, but we were, training for this, I guess you would say, that we were able to fight the revolution and actually succeed as well as we did.
Yes, it's also a desperate thing. You realize that both armies are like this. No one really wants to fight a war, but they have to. And the biggest 2 things that I found in all the different experiments in doing this, because I wanted to know what it was really like, was water and sleep. If you don't get the amount of sleep that you need every day, and I know they're talking about that, it's the same thing with modern warfare. Sleep deprivation is the first thing you do to break down an enemy. The other thing is good water. The British, when they raid Connecticut, they pollute the wells, every well they can find. The average amount of water we had in the 18th century in a canteen that you could drink was the equivalent of a 20-ounce bottle of water today. That's all you had all day. Your horse got water, but you were limited because he was your way in and out of anywhere.
What kind of men joined? I mean, talking back now originally, what kind of men joined this cavalry? I mean, did they all have horses? Were they all farmers?
Actually,
you may sit if you would like.
About 60% of them were farmers.
Okay.
We had cobblers, joiners. Joiners is a form of carpentry at the time. Carpenters, proper carpenters, sailors, people from every walk of life, from every type of society. We had Spaniards, American Indians from the Pequot Nation. We had Englishmen, Irishmen, Scots, Italians, Germans. It was just amazing, the broad spectrum. You would think that everybody in an English colony was just English and would speak English. They weren't. Over half the colony were immigrants coming in, taking advantage. Many of them were skilled in different areas. So they were brought in by the English lords who owned land in the colonies, specifically to do the work that they wanted done. So they would bring in skilled wood carvers, stonemasons, specialists in brickwork, along with the common trades that we had here.
Right.
And then you had silversmiths and people of that nature,
Sure.
saddlers, and an awful lot of displaced teachers. We found out Nathan Hale was a teacher.
Oh, interesting.
Benjamin Talmadge of our unit, who was one of Washington's spy officers, again, teacher. Sheldon himself, his father was in the War Bureau, and he was raising horses for his father's farm up in the upper part of the state, up by Sharon.
Sharon, Connecticut.
Yeah, and he moved from place to place. He ended up in Salisbury. The original farmstead and a cemetery are still there, and there's still a horse farm there. He's done all these sort of things. These were common men who said that they had enough of what the king did. And it's a
Right.
very hard decision. The best way to equate it today, psychologically, is what would prompt us in our colony today, Connecticut,
Right.
to grab our shotgun or our hunting rifle off the wall, band with our neighbors, and attack a federal arsenal. What would be the condition that would cause a mental and emotional reaction like that for us today?
Right.
That's what happened over their rights of being an Englishman.
Did they consider them to, did they no longer want to be Englishmen, or they wanted to be Englishmen or to have the privileges that the English in England had?
Yes, exactly. They wanted the equal rights with the Englishmen in England. Failing to do that, it became that after they found that they could stand up to the British Army and that they could still get along even though they had the various acts that the English had done on the trade, they got that sense of Yankee independence and suddenly said, well, you know, we were alone while Cromwell was fighting a civil war. We in Connecticut got along fine. They tried to take our charter back, hence the Charter Oak. They failed. They have failed to stop our trade now. Connecticut was one of the smuggling capitals.
Oh, interesting.
Just prior to the rebel. In fact, the British referred to this particular regiment when it was out on the Sound as Pirates of Long Island. And I felt that was kind of funny.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
You read all sorts of anecdotes and stories. The bottom line is that that sense of independence and the fact that we weren't being treated as Englishmen, and that when we were considered rebels under the king's rule in 1776, when after they tried petitioning the king and it failed to get to a peaceful point, as the Second Continental Congress starts the debate about independence, and eventually Thomas Jefferson drafts some paperwork with the help of some of his friends from Connecticut, and the Connecticut Compromise, which makes it possible, we then see the change. And the change is dramatic and quite quick. The Yankees out of Connecticut have had enough. They are going to be independent one way or another. And Connecticut gives everything. It gave the second largest number of men out of New England to the Continental Army, and provided Washington with 1/4 of all of his cavalry. A tremendous undertaking. The King of England had a hard enough time where they were all independent and then brought under the crown and then sent to different places throughout the world. For a single entity such as the state of Connecticut at that time, the new state of Connecticut, which was bankrupt, it was relying on its cottage industries of the women who were at home with the children, making the clothing in lieu of paying taxes, making the ammunition up for the troops. You start reading all this stuff. Women were the businessmen. They ran the farms. They were running the trades. The older men that could not fight or had a disability were doing other things. At Saratoga, though, we did dig up at Leonard's Brigade's charge against the British. There was a man that was roughly 78 years old, and we found the body, or the skeletal remains, with 3 musket balls on it. So this man at 78 had been fighting in the Battle of Saratoga, had been killed, and his compatriots evidently loved him enough that they dug a spot in the earthworks where the British line was and buried him right there, up against the earthworks where he had fallen.
Wow.
And when they were doing the survey, they found the body. Connecticut has a lot of firsts. When the British are defeated at Saratoga, their first major loss since the 7 Years' War, Burgoyne is escorted by the 2nd Dragoons from the Battle of Saratoga down the Hudson, across Massachusetts, into Connecticut. And from here, he's then sent out roughly what's Route 84, back to Massachusetts, to Boston when it's been arranged for him. The in-between time with Connecticut and all was because they were also marching the Germans that were captured to Tolland, Connecticut. That's where they ended up, prisoners of war. We know that the troops came through the streets of what's Route 10 through Simsbury. A lot of things, little things you don't know about Connecticut.
Right.
But we were hosting the prisoners of the war from the Battle of Saratoga, what they call the Army of Convention.
And And you find all this kind of stuff by reading old diaries and letters.
And letters.
Yeah,
And
and
then there's some good history books out there, and the
Yes.
internet has made a lot more available. There are the National Archive rolls, but you have to take all of this in stride and put it together. During the 70s, when I was doing my studies, we developed something that we called forensic archaeology.
Okay.
For on-site, when we were digging up a site.
How would you even know to go to a site? I mean, you read someplace that you
There
thought...
was something there. You
Okay.
take legend. There is usually at least 10% truth in a legend.
Oh, okay.
And you work from there. Again, it's a mystery.
Sure.
Who doesn't love a good mystery?
Absolutely.
And that's what this becomes. It's a mystery where you're looking at this and going, I wonder what happened next.
Right.
And once you say that, you go, oh my God, here I go again.
Do you need permission from the state? Is there a Department of Archaeology or something that you need permission to dig up sites and stuff
It
like that?
depends. If it's a public ground, you need the local municipality. You bring in the state archaeologists if you can get them. If not, you get another certified archaeologist locally who can help you. You lay out your grids. You just don't go digging up
Right,
somebody's yard.
right.
In my case, I have a yard that wasn't historic property, so I dig where I want. I'm just worried we're going to find the body of the first owner. We found his stone, but we haven't found where he's been buried, and we haven't been able to find any records that they buried him in town. So I kind of leave that area of the yard alone,
Right,
where
right.
we think he might be. But it can be fun. I had the opportunity younger to work on a lot of the archaeological digs and find things, and it's a thrill. Because once you get down and use brush, and one of the finest brushes to use, believe it or not, are the makeup brushes that women have.
Oh, okay.
Because it is so fine that it allows you to take a grain or two off at a time so you don't disturb the artifact that you're trying to excavate.
Of course, yes. Yeah, who would think that Connecticut would be the site of so much...
Oh my God.
but in fact it is, because it
Yes.
has such an important position in that war, and there's the residuals of all of that stuff. I guess barns and animals and people. Do you find the swords and all kinds of stuff
Yes.
like that? Yes.
Recently, I was given a musket that was literally lock, stock, and barrel, as they say. It's a British Brown Bess stock for an officer's model, but it has French parts. And I started looking at it and I went, oh my God, this is a French lock, a French barrel, and a side plate, and they were all numbered the same, so they came off the same gun.
Right, right.
And the musket part, the stock, was a British, probably an artillery piece or an officer's fusee. They were smaller than the standard British weapon, but I noticed all the piping and the other parts for the trigger guard and the like were what I'd seen in so many museums. This is the British Brown Bess. And somebody put them together.
When you find things like that, do you then give it to a museum? You yourselves don't maintain a museum.
We are working on it.
Ah.
We have original saddlebags, holsters. We have a lot of the stuff. We have a French carbine from the period 1774, the swords. I have a sword at home that was identified by Mount Vernon as the same maker of George's swords. And when we had been down there visiting, they at first thought that I had somehow was walking out with one of theirs. And I got a quick tour by the security department.
Right.
And my wife was horrified. But we had gone down there to dress up in uniform and get some pictures. We were going to be doing some programs for them.
Right.
Needless to say, once they identified, so, oh, you would want to donate to our collection. I go, yeah, not going to happen with me. That sword sits at home in a very special bag and comes out on very special occasions.
So your ambition is to actually build a museum?
We've been collecting books, original documents, original memorabilia, artifacts from that period. We would like to someday put up a museum or get a museum site where we can put this all in as, this is the 2nd Dragoons from Connecticut. Okay. This is Washington's special cavalry. The French comment that he's never without them. They're considered the best troops on the continent. And this is from the French, who really didn't care for the Americans. People think they came over here and they loved us. They didn't want to be here. Their officers looked at the American army and went, really? We have to work with them? And yet, Chastellux, who was the go-between Washington and Rochambeau, and the second in command of all the French troops, actually said about our particular regiment, they didn't fear the British Dragoons. Well, the British Dragoons we had to fight against was later called Tarleton's Legion. So these were the toughest of the British, and we would lock horns with them along the great frontier that we today call Greenwich. And I did my book on that.
Oh,
And
okay.
I actually have a couple of sightings of that where they named the farm where our troopers stayed, the name of the trooper, and the name of the militiaman from Greenwich. So we have that type of information. That's the level we have to get at. The people that we recruit into our organization have to be willing to become educators. They have to be willing to be a soldier, just as they were then.
Right.
It takes a little more doing.
And you would hope they would know how to ride a horse.
Well,
Or-
that's an extra benefit
Oh,
because
okay.
today's world, we don't have 420 horses.
Oh, okay.
No one does. In fact, the United States Cavalry, Troop A on this side of the Mississippi and Troop B on the western side, they have a memorial squad in each case of about 25 men. And outside of that, the different states have organizations that will have it. Connecticut has the oldest cavalry tradition between our regiment, the 2nd Dragoons, 1st Company Governor's Horse Guard, 2nd Company's Governor's Horse Guard. It is the oldest continuous cavalry tradition in the entire Western Hemisphere,
My goodness.
unbroken back to 1774.
And how many people are part of your group?
Today we have about 20.
You have about 20.
We cannot meet the demand for our volunteer activities to educate the public and to provide escorts and other things. The hardest part is actually coming up with people that'll serve on foot. Horseback riding is another thing. We have a lesson program. We have a program where we teach them the use of the different types of weapons of the period, how to use them safely so that no one gets hurt.
Right.
We teach them about horse grooming and care and ground manners. And then if they want to ride, they then go for classes at a certified instructor from Yukon. We have a person who has come out of the Yukon equine program, and she's a very good instructor, so that they learn proper equitation. Then when they come back to me, I ruin them by teaching them how the cavalry rode. But they have to have all the skills.
Sure.
Because the cavalry rode a little longer stirrup and they sat deeper, which is why their butts were generally able to glow in the dark.
That's how red they were, yes?
And the surprising part is though that everything that I'm wearing and the leather breeches, I can ride 14 hours in these leather breeches and this uniform without hurting myself. If I wore modern riding clothes as I've done and made that mistake, after about the second hour, things start to become a little uncomfortable.
Wow, that's amazing. It's
They
amazing.
designed to be in the saddle, to grip the saddle better. Leather against the leather saddle, it beats Velcro. I mean, people, oh, great riding. Go, if they only knew.
Oh, interesting, interesting.
But they could take a raw recruit, and we have the letters from that, May of 1780. They took in recruits, and by the end of June, somebody who knew nothing was now able to fight on foot, handle a horse, and was now able to ride and learn how to fight off the horse's back
Wow.
in 60 days. Well, we said, how much could they learn? And that was the biggest challenge, is what we demonstrate this to the public, what they could teach a man to defend himself and to be a threat to the enemy, and what they could teach somebody who knew nothing, what they could learn in 60 days.
Wow.
And that's the challenge for us today with our recruits, the challenge that we have with folks that want to join, or the public to see, because the education programs we do this. Occasionally when we get a grant big enough, we bring in our counterparts, the Tarleton's Legion, the Queen's Rangers, their horse unit. They give the British view, and then we show everything at Common Drill, what this was like, and it's very hard for people to see that. The accent today for us, though, is we went the last step for our people in that we use only rescue horses.
Interesting.
All the horses that we have on our website, you can see their histories. Every one of them was headed down the end of the line.
The glue factory.
Yeah, glue factory would be close, or they were going to Canada for the last vacation. They all have to get over the fear, again, of being mistreated. And then we bring them to the next step, where they get used to being handled again, get used to getting on and off a trailer, get used to coming at right times for food. They bond with our people, and then from there we teach them the drill that they would have learned then, and then we teach them to be a cavalry horse.
Wow.
So it's, when you're seeing us, you're not coming to see something that's staged. You
Right.
actually watch us training that horse that day. He may do something right, he may do something wrong, but that day that you're there, you have stepped back to what it was like in colonial Connecticut in 1778 or 1779 or 1780, and you're watching a dragoon from your state now working with a horse. It won't be a spectacular show,
Right.
but what you're seeing is the same thing they did, getting the same reaction with the horse, because the horse doesn't know that it's an education program or he's going to a reenactment or this is just for fun for the day. To the horse, it's life and death. Every time you get on the horse, your accident rate is 50% because he thinks differently than you.
Right.
That's where the horsemanship comes in. That's where the training comes in. And when the public comes and sees us, they're seeing the real thing happening right in front of them.
Now, you guys are located in Colchester, and can the public just come, or you have special times that you, or do you not allow the public to?
Right now, we're not allowing the public because we're building the facility.
Okay.
We're building a brand new replica barn of the original one that stood in 1740. This is a colonial property. It was a tavern during the Revolution. In fact, we're the first owners of it outside of anybody related to the original family.
Wow.
So we're building the barn. It's a typical 18th century English barn. It's 2 stories with a hayloft. It stands 40 feet high, 60 feet long by 30 plus feet wide. We were able to salvage all of most of the original foundation. So we have stonemasons in there that have given up time. Other people have that have worked in post and beam. They are rebuilding the barn from the ground up the same way with the stalls. The stalls have to meet modern compliance. We can't live the way they did then.
Right.
So it's all being done. And the second floor will be an activity center where people can come for lectures. They can learn about this. Eventually, we hope 5 years down the road that we can open it as a public place for the school programs that we do. We have been doing school programs with kids and bringing these horses out where they can put their hands on them and groom them and work with the horses. We've been doing that since 1978.
You do this with public schools all over the state?
Yeah, and it's word of mouth. We're not. We do not solicit. We're not allowed to solicit because we can be reactivated by special order under the governor. So we mind our business, and the school system wants us. If they come up with the amount of money that we need, we actually bring the whole program on the school grounds.
Oh, you bring the horses to the school.
Everything is brought to the school. We bring crafters, lecturers. We give a lecture about what it was like for the kids in a general assembly about their town, what that town did during the American Revolution.
Wow.
And because our Dragoons came from all 169 towns, we can tell them about Joe Smith from your town, and he was in our unit, and this is what he did, and this is how he dressed. And suddenly, that kid or that adult knows that from their town, they were a part of this. And that's what we try
Living
to
history,
show.
absolutely. I love it. I love it. Do you want people to contact you?
Well, absolutely. It's
Okay.
the website is state monitored, and other people look at it, and we're more than happy to have people contact us through there. We get about 15 to 20 questions a week on members who were the original members, people looking them up for genealogy and other things.
Oh, interesting.
Questioning
Okay.
on history.
Right.
The original regiment had one of the best composite records. We have the eye color, the hair color, the complexion color, the height of a
Wow.
man, what he did before the Revolution, what he did in his service time,
Wow.
and how long he stayed in.
That's
so we
wonderful.
have quite a bit on each of these men, and of course the town they originally came from.
Sure, that is wonderful. And I know that you're having some upcoming events. People should go to the website if they're looking for information all along. But you're having some activities in Wethersfield?
Yes, we're going to be supporting the Wethersfield Historical Society on May 23rd. It's a Saturday.
That's part of Memorial Weekend.
Yes, we're going to be there on the Saturday, and this year I think the town wants us to be on the original green, which is the original green that our regiment trained on and formed on in March 17th, 1777. So for us, it's going home.
Absolutely. And then in September, you're going to be at
Fort Trumbull.
Fort Trumbull
In New London.
In New London, nearby New London. Wonderful.
And we will be doing a full cavalry program, and on that weekend we'll be training probably newer horsemen, because there will be an upcoming show out of state on the field where the actual first cavalry charge of the United States took place, and we were that unit. So we're going for a fall show. That would be Schoharie, New York, up in the Schoharie Valley.
Okay.
And we will be going up there in October. So people will get to see us very intense, going over the skills of how to use the sword and the pistol,
right,
and the carbine off the horse.
That is wonderful.
And this year, if they do, we don't have the schedules yet, but the town of Griswold is having their bicentennial year. So we will be in Griswold, Connecticut throughout this year, doing their parades, their summer encampment in July, and Heroes Day on October 12th this year. And it's always the Saturday after September 11th.
Okay.
So September 12th, we will be at Griswold to do that program.
So you guys keep very busy. You must have many events all over not only all over the state, but actually in nearby states as well.
Within from here to Virginia, we've had over 100 requests. We take 18 of those a year.
Wow.
There's only so many we can take.
Exactly.
Because we also do the school programs, and those are our first priority. If the school calls us, we can arrange a date with them, and they can get the funding, then we go in and we do a whole day's program for the kids, usually from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. We follow federal guidelines, so everything is done within their time limit, so families don't have to worry about chaperones. Families come out and they watch it. It's a field day for the kids and the families. Two of the systems that we're at, we've been doing it for 10 or 11 years straight.
Wow.
Where everybody comes out and the kids saying, oh, this year I'm in the 5th grade, next year I get to see that program because I'll be in the 6th grade.
That's
so
great.
it's sort of like the rights that the kids feel they have, and it's fun. For me, it's a lot of fun to see the expression on their face when they actually get up against the horse and we say, all right, put your hand here. Now this is the brush, and the horses love it. Last year we got, oh my God, the horse is dying. And I'm going, what? And we run over, and the horse was so happy with the way the kids were brushing, he fell asleep. Horses sleep on their feet.
Right,
So
exactly.
he's snoring. And I'm going, this isn't really exactly what I wanted to show them, the mean wild war horse, he's snoring in front of a bunch of 6th graders. But
well, that sounds fascinating. So I want to thank you so much for
thank
coming.
you.
And I just hope people do go on your website, find out about all of the upcoming programs, and if they are interested, they can they can contact you and find out for a school program when the public is able to see you in many of the shows that you put on around the state.
oh, absolutely, because that's what we do. We are public service. If the towns are not charging the public, then we will be more acceptable to going to that town.
Okay.
That will get the first priority. We have to be available to the public.
Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for sharing with us the uniform, the story. It's wonderful.
You're more than welcome, and thank you for taking the time.
This is Harriet Grayson, and I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope you've learned a little bit about the American Revolution, and please do go ahead and get involved. Look at that website and follow what's going on, and it's a living history moment. Again, thank you, and look forward to seeing you again.